And our second session today is entitled Ministries of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. I am not Reverend Professor Romanos Karanos, but that's okay. Let me go ahead and introduce our three panelists, and then we'll invite each one of them up individually. First, Father Luke Veronis is director of the Missions Institute of Orthodox Christianity and has been teaching as an instructor at Hellenic College, Holy Cross, since 2005. For the past 18 years, he has overseen a renewal of Saints Constantine and Helen Greek Orthodox Church in Webster, Massachusetts. He has been involved in the Orthodox Church's missionary movement since 1987, serving as a missionary priest in post-communist Albania for 10.5 years with his wife and children, as well as serving in East Africa for 18 months. He has led 9 short-term missions to Project Mexico, building homes for the needy in Tijuana. He has published 4 books related to missions, witness, and outreach. Professor Veronia Sumaikis holds a PhD in History and Education from Teachers College, Columbia University. She currently teaches in the Modern Greek program at Queens College, the City University of New York. Her research interests include the history of education, immigration and ethnicity, and religion and education. She is co-editor with Theodore Zervas of Educating Greek Americans, Historical Perspectives and Contemporary Pathways. Welcome, Veronia. And then finally, Dr. Aristotle Michopoulos at the end of our table here is Professor Emeritus of Classics and Greek Studies here at Hellenic College, where from 95 to 96 and 97 to 2002, he served as Dean and Acting Dean of Hellenic College. He's a graduate of the University of Athens, the CUNY Graduate Center, and Florida State University. He taught at Florida State University and the University of Florida, where he served as Associate Director of this Greek Studies program prior to his appointment at Greek Studies Director at Hellenic College. Throughout his academic scholarship, through his academic scholarships from the Greek Government Foundation, the United States Government Department of Education, and the Fulbright Foundation, he was able to advance his studies and conduct research in Greece and the United States. He's published numerous articles and books in the area of Greek education. Thank you, Ari. Okay, very good. So I would like to welcome to the podium, and we will start off with Father Luke Veronis, who will be speaking to us on the history of cross-cultural missions and the global impact of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America. Father Luke.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here and have this opportunity to reflect, to think about our Archdiocese. And something that I'm passionate about is the witness, especially the cross-cultural witness that our Archdiocese has offered. So, obviously, we're celebrating 100 years of the Archdiocese, and we all realize our Archdiocese began as an immigrant church, a community of Greeks coming to America, to the new land, to the new world, to strive to fulfill the American dream. And this community of believers came together very early on. Here in New England, we have, I think, 30 churches that before the Archdiocese was established, celebrating its 100th anniversary, we had 30 communities already established here in New England. So they gathered together as churches to offer a place of worship. But of course, it wasn't simply a place of worship where believers gathered, but it was a place where these families could raise their families in a familiar and comfortable setting, where they could hear their native language, where they could practice the faiths and traditions from their homeland, where they could spend time with like-minded people, and where they could feel safe and comfortable in a strange land. In many ways, we could say that the first churches, the first generation of believers in the churches, they really viewed the church as a religious sanctuary that protected them from the larger, strange, foreign world. It was a safe haven. Now, of course, the church, and especially when the Archdiocese was established, represented the ecumenical patriarchate of Constantinople, and it represented the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. It was the church that Jesus Christ established and sent out his followers to go forth and make disciples of all nations. It wasn't supposed to be a safe haven against the world. It was in the world, but not of the world. It was called to be a part of the new Israel, a continuation of the chosen people of God from ancient Israel. And if you remember the words from Isaiah, when God told Isaiah, it's too little of a thing for you to be a light to your own people, to Judea, but you're called to be a light to the nations, so that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. So living out this apostolic and universal identity, it took time for our Greek Archdiocese and the churches in America to realize, to put into practice. Our Greek Orthodox Church started as an immigrant church for Greeks and for people of the Balkans. But ultimately, it had to understand and live out its calling as the church for people of all nations, to really live out the one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. St. John Chrysostom, 1600 years ago, he preached one of my favorite phrases that he used. He said there are two kinds of bishops. One bishop is a pastor who says, my parish is my universe, while the other bishop says, the universe is my parish. The parish is my universe, or the universe is my parish. And he warned us, like the great fathers, they warned us that one of the most dangerous temptations that plague the people of God from the time of ancient Israel throughout our day today, it's the heresy of parochialism, of becoming just focused on your own people. Israel never forgot that they were the chosen people of God, but they often forgot why they were chosen. They were chosen so that they could be a blessing to all the nations of the world. And the church, throughout its history, at times forgot its call to all nations and sometimes just acted in a parochial sense to protect its own people. And that basically was the Greek Archdiocese in America. We could even say for the first 50 years. It was an immigrant church taking care of its own people, focusing on itself, not being too interested and not being too open to the larger society in America. By the middle of the 20th century, the Archdiocese began slowly moving beyond this parochial immigrant identity. And it started looking for practical ways to embrace the universal understanding of the church. In 1956, here at this School of Holy Cross, Bishop Athenagoras Kokinakis of Eleus, who was the dean of the Holy Cross at that time, he invited for the first time some students from Korea to come to the seminary to study. And I think this was the first time that some foreigners, other than Greeks, were coming to study at the seminary. It was also this year that he established amongst the seminarians themselves the Orthodox Mission Society. Father Alexander Veronis, my father, he was a student at that time, and he was a member of the original missionary society. And actually, he would become one of the main catalysts to inspire the Archdiocese to live up to its missionary calling. In the early 1960s, after my father graduated from Holy Cross, graduated from Boston University, and then went to the University of Athens, in the early 1960s, Father Veronis came into contact with a young, charismatic theologian, Anastasios Yanolatos. This dynamic deacon Anastasios at that time offered challenging sermons and began producing a periodical and producing inspired writings that began to challenge and dare the Church of Greece, as well as the larger Orthodox world through the youth group of Syndesmos, to rediscover the forgotten commandment, what he called the forgotten commandment, the Great Commission, Matthew 28, to go and make disciples of all nations. And Anastasios Yanolatos began to embrace this missionary mandate and tried to influence, and we see over the next 50, 60 years how Archbishop Anastasios ended up not only impacting the Church of Greece, but became the central voice throughout the larger Orthodox world. And he played a significant influence in the change of mentality in the church in America. When my father and mother came back from Greece in 1962, they were assigned to the Annunciation Church in Lancaster. And one of the first things they did to promote foreign missions was they established what they called during Great Lent, they called the Self-Denial Missions Club. And the Self-Denial Missions Club during Lent, they said they challenged their parishioners to deny themselves a meal a week, and then with the money that they denied themselves, gather that money together, and they started collecting boxes of books, Bibles, materials to send to the young Orthodox churches in the mission land. I highlight this because this example of the Annunciation Church in 1962, 3-4 became later a model that was practiced throughout the Archdiocese. So the spirit of mission began to spread. In 1965 and 1966, Archbishop Iakovos granted Father Veronis to arrange for Father Theodore Nakiamis of Uganda and Father Paul de Ballester of Mexico. He allowed my father to arrange a speaking tour where these two foreign priests traveled to 75 parishes throughout the Archdiocese. Now, both these priests, Father Nakiamis, who was a Ugandan, and Father de Ballester, who was from Mexico, both spoke fluent English and Greek. And what was noteworthy was Father Nakiamis from Uganda. Imagine the time, 1965, in the height of the civil rights movement of America, you had this very dark-skinned African Orthodox priest who traveled around to dozens and dozens of parishes throughout the Greek Archdiocese, speaking and shocking all the Greek parishes, first of all, to see a black priest at the altar, and then when this black priest came out, who spoke fluent Greek and who could speak in a humorous way, that he attracted and touched the hearts of many people. But this was an opening in the Archdiocese when both Father Nakiamis and Father de Ballester began to help our Archdiocese realize, the people of our Archdiocese realize, Orthodoxy was much more than the Greek church in America or the Greek church back in Greece. After this, Father Veronis began working with Bishop Silas Koskinas with the endorsement again of Archbishop Iakovos to create the National Archdiocesan Foreign Missions Committee. And this was established at the Clergy Laity Congress in 1966. And for the next 2 decades, this volunteer committee worked at supporting various Orthodox mission churches around the world, while also bringing students from Uganda, Korea, Kenya, different countries abroad, bringing them here to Hellenic College, to Holy Cross, and to St. Basil's Academy. That committee functioned for almost 20 years, bringing students, mainly that was their goal, sending materials overseas to these churches and mission lands. By 1984, the Foreign Missions Committee outgrew its ability to function only with volunteers. At the 27th Archdiocesan Clergy Laity, Archbishop Iakovos appointed Father Demetrius Kushel, now Bishop Demetrius of Xanthos, as the first executive director at the St. Photios Shrine in St. Augustine, Florida, but he also asked him to head up the newly created Archdiocesan Mission Center. The symbolic meaning of placing the mission center in the very place where the first Greeks arrived in America seemed appropriate. During the same year, Father Veronis worked together with one of his parishioners in Lancaster, Helen Nicozisis, and a group of faithful benefactors from the Annunciation Church to establish a $1 million endowment fund for Orthodox mission called EFOM, the Endowment Fund for Orthodox Missions. From 1984 to the present, EFOM would sponsor an annual mission lecture here at Holy Cross School of Theology to help raise awareness and to help challenge the students of this school to be aware of the centrality of the spirit of mission. IFAM also began offering scholarships to students interested in missions. And the eventual goal of IFAM was to establish either a chair or it became the Missions Institute of Orthodox Christianity, which was established in 2010 here at Holy Cross. And since its inception, the Mission Institute has offered classes, 2 classes a semester here at HCHC, classes related to missions, evangelism, outreach, world religions, and other type of classes, again, to challenge the students to understand the primary place of the Spirit in the life of the church. This Mission Institute also has co-sponsored or organized conferences related to missions, such as the Changing Contours of World Christianity in 2010, Orthodox Theological Schools in America and their role in the global missionary movement, Speaking to Secular America, how the church is reaching out to the non-religious in America, and Discipleship and Christian Formation. The Institute also has brought renowned missionaries and speakers onto campus to inspire and challenge the students and future priests here at HCHC. After the establishment of the Archdiocesan Mission Center in 1985, the Archdiocesan Mission Center sent out the first cross-cultural long-term missionaries from our archdiocese, Father Dan and Presbytera Nancy Christopoulos. Father Dan was a recent graduate of Holy Cross, and he and his wife traveled to Kenya to work under Archbishop Anastasios Yanulatos, who was the acting Archbishop of East Africa. And Father Dan and Presbytera Nancy ended up serving for 2 years in Kenya. This same year that Father Dan and Nancy went as a long-term missionary from our archdiocese, it was also that year that the mission program moved into its permanent home, moving out of the St. Phocius Shrine, and they moved in and established their own home, which was called the Father Alexander Veronis Mission Home. And this served as the new administrative headquarters of the Greek Archdiocese. The same year, 1987, that was the first year that the Mission Center sent out its first mission team, 25 mostly young adults who were sent to Kenya, again under Archbishop Anastasios, to go and build a stone church in an area of Kenya where there was no permanent church for 15 communities that lived in that area. Kenya represented the largest Orthodox church in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's noteworthy that on this first mission trip that went, just a short mission trip, there were 9 of the participants would be eventual Holy Cross graduates. 3 of them actually are teaching here, are professors at the school. Father Dr. Patitsis, Father Zamaris, and myself were a part of that first team. 2 years after Father Dan and Nancy were sent by Archdiocese, they came back to America, and the Archdiocese sent the next long-term missionary, cross-cultural missionary, Father Martin Ritzi and his wife, Presbytera Renee. And they went to Kenya to serve for the next 4 years, and then after Kenya, they went to Albania to serve 6 years. So they became the longest-standing missionaries, again, representing our archdiocese. Father Martin, after his service in Kenya and Albania, he then became the second executive director of the Mission Center following Father Bishop Kushel. In 1994, the GOA Mission Center was reaching out to Orthodox churches in 25 countries. Up to this point, the Greek Archdiocese was the only Orthodox jurisdiction in America with a foreign missions program. The Board of Missions at the center, with the approval of Archbishop Anastasios and with the endorsement of the 32nd clergy laity, they expanded they decided to expand the Archdiocesan Mission Center into a pan-Orthodox, inviting all the other archdioceses to become a part of it, and this became known as the Orthodox Christian Mission Center, the OCMC. The goal of the OCMC has been to bring the life-transforming and saving teachings of Jesus Christ among non-Christians and to wherever it presently does not exist in the world, the church. The OCMC mission statement is to establish vibrant Orthodox communities, Eucharistic communities throughout the world, and to recruit, train, and support Orthodox missionaries to preach, teach, baptize, and minister to the spiritual and physical needs of those being served. So one of the big accomplishments of the Archdiocese in the idea of cross-cultural missions was this eventual establishment of the OCMC. Over the past 38 years, the Archdiocesan Mission Center and the OCMC have sent out more than 100 long-term cross-cultural missions. Long-term means they served at least for 2 years. Our longest-serving OCMC missionary now is going on 22 years serving cross-culturally. So they've sent more than 100 long-term missionaries, and they've sent out 2,800 volunteers who've participated in mission trips. That could be anywhere from 2 weeks to 1 month. But each of these trips give an exposure to the participants to understand Orthodox Christianity as much broader than the former parochial vision that the church had. Today, the OCMC works in 28 countries, and it has 34 long-term missionaries presently out in the field, and it also supports 375 indigenous clergy in mission lands. Another significant aspect of the cross-cultural mission movement, which the Archdiocese has supported, it didn't create, but it's been a big supporter of, and the churches have been a big supporter of, has been Project Mexico. Project Mexico was established in 1988, and through this organization, Project Mexico, they've built 400 homes for families in need in Tijuana. But what's most significant, not only the 400 homes and families that they've changed, but 16,000 Orthodox Christians from America, many of whom have been from the Greek Archdiocese, have participated in these mission trips. And it's really been life transformative for many people. My parish, which has had a major turnaround from being a parochial, closed-minded, small parish to a parish that has been active and involved in the global mission, one of the main reasons why it's been transformed is because our parish has gone to Mexico 10 times, and 150 different people have participated through our parish in Project Mexico. But our parish is only one example of many parishes in the Archdiocese that have been involved. And the director of Project Mexico is Father Nicholas Andrew Chow, who's a priest of the Greek Archdiocese, and his wife, Presbytera Mary Lynn, who's a graduate of Holy Cross. Another area where our Archdiocese has broken away from its parochial understanding is here at HCHC. You know, for the last 80 years that HCHC has been functioning, I think there have been around 1,300 graduates from our school. And more than 120 of those 1,300 graduates have gone on after graduation to serve outside of America. When I did a study of all the graduates, and especially over the last 30 years, the first 50 years, it was a pretty parochial seminary. But over the last 30 years, about 50% of our students have participated on cross-cultural mission trips like OCMC trips or Project Mexico. So 50% of our students have at least experienced that. And then there have been, I think, 35 graduates of our school who have gone on to long-term missionary service. So it's just showing a change in the spirit of our school here as well. One other area that I just want to mention before I close is it's not so much related to cross-cultural missions of establishing Eucharistic communities in other parts of the world, but it is a witness to the global world. And that's the ministry of the International Orthodox Christian Charities, the IOCC. Although this isn't specifically, again, established and related to the Greek Archdiocese alone, the Greek Archdiocese has been very much a part of it and has been supporting the IOCC since its foundation in 1992. Of course, we know the executive director, Constantine Triandafilou. He's the son of Father Nicholas Triandafilou, one of the faithful, devout clergy of our archdiocese. And Constantine Triandafilou has done an amazing job in leading this ministry of the IOCC, which has, in the last 30 years, provided $770 million of humanitarian aid in places of crisis throughout the world in the name of the Orthodox churches in America. So, cross-cultural mission and the global witness of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, it's developed. The first 50 years, the first 70 years, it was very minimal. We still need a lot to do. We can still be very parochial in our worldview, in our vision. Many of our parishes are still very parochial, but there are great examples of parishes, of clergy, and of ministries that the Archdiocese is supporting that reflect the positive of John Chrysostom's words. The parish is my universe, or the universe is my parish. We're making strides and we're improving in this idea of realizing the universe is our parish. We have a responsibility as the Archdiocese to be reaching out and witnessing to the world and helping to make disciples of all nations. Thank you.
Is there any one clarifying question anybody might have? Yes.
Is the issue of Tijuana, isn't there an archdiocese in Mexico? Is there not an archdiocese in Mexico City? Correct me.
Yes, there is an archdiocese in Mexico City. There are two. There's an Antiochian and a Greek. An Antiochian, yes. So there's.
But the work in Tijuana is.
So Project Mexico began as a project that had the blessing of the bishops in Mexico, but it's been an American, mostly an American effort in the beginning. Then they've created a board, and they have a Mexican connection with it as well. And actually, just recently, the most recent graduate of Holy Cross, who just became the next clergyman to serve there, he was ordained. He's an American, a convert American, but he was ordained in Mexico City under Metropolitan, I think Ignati it is, in Mexico City. So yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Father Luke. Next, I'd like to welcome up to the podium Veronis Sumaikis, who will be speaking on community activism and the Ladies Philoptochos Society in New York City. And I do think we have a PowerPoint. Okay, very good. Veronis.
Do I turn it on, or? Great, thank you. And apologies if the font might be a little small. I do have a photocopy of my slides for anyone who might be interested in taking a look at them later on. So good afternoon to everyone, and thank you to the Holy Cross community and to Dr. Jim Skedros, Father Tony Vrame, for organizing this important event celebrating the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of America at 100 years. Okay. In 1948, Jimmy Hadzaris, writing from the U.S. Marine Hospital on Ellis Island, sent a letter to Katie Vlavianos, president of the Ladies Philoptochos Society of Holy Trinity Church in New York City. And he wrote, "My most reverend Mrs. Katie, allow me to offer my respects to you. The other day, the staff on Ellis Island informed me that a very nice lady will come to visit. Thank you very much for your concern, for the concern you have shown me. I am ill, and I have no one who visits me here in this foreign land. I wish only for some consolation and a visit. Please forgive me, as I am unable to write more clearly. My hands are trembling. The visiting room is open, and you do not require a pass. Please come when you are able. I await you. In closing my letter, I kiss your hand. Respectfully, Jimmy. And this is my own rough translation of the Greek original. It is not clear from the records who Jimmy Hadzaris was and what might have happened to him. But what the records do reveal is that there are countless letters such as this one where the writer expresses their gratitude for some company, a care bundle, or a monetary gift that was given to them by the women of the Philoptochos Society. Women like Katie Vlavianos offered compassion and advocacy to their fellow countrymen. My topic today focuses on philanthropy and specifically the Ladies Philoptochos Society and their efforts during the 1930s and 1940s in New York City. My aim is to highlight their work in terms of community activism, social welfare, and education. And when we think of the Philoptochos, what often comes to mind is fundraising in our parish communities. We see fundraising in the form of annual balls and luncheons, the cutting of the Vasilopita to benefit St. Basil's Academy, or the Lenten luncheon in support of Hellenic College Holy Cross. On the National Philoptochos website, we see an impressively broad range of philanthropic activities that are undertaken at the countrywide level. Past Philoptochos members, Stella Koumandaros and Terry Koken, have each written histories where they enumerate the major turning points in the organization's decades-long trajectory. There is, however, as historia Andrea Walton suggests, and I quote, a larger cultural tapestry of women's philanthropy, end quote, that is at stake here. One which has enabled Greek women to promote education and to leverage their social and intellectual networks in support of their work. And what I'd like to do now is offer a little bit of contextual background on New York City and the formation of the Philoptochos Society in New York City, in Holy Trinity Church. And here we have a group photo of the Philoptochos women with Archbishop Athinagoras, and immediately to the left of him is Katie Vlavianos. Since the first Greek immigrants arrived in the United States in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Greek women have participated in and shaped the philanthropic and educational institutions operating within the sphere of the Greek Orthodox Church. The church offered women an acceptable vehicle for contributing their efforts to the Greek immigrant community, as well as a forum for cultivating leadership skills. Philanthropic works were not unfamiliar to the Greek immigrants, nor to the women who arrived from urban diaspora communities and who settled in the United States. In 19th century Greece, Turkey, and Egypt, for example, Greeks had established churches, schools, hospitals, and literary societies. And we even see in Chicago, the famed social reformer Jane Addams provided Hull House as a base from which Greek women attended to the needs of the poor. In 1891, the Brotherhood of Athena, the fraternal society in New York City, raised funds to establish the Church of the Holy Trinity. It was here that the Ladies Philoptochos Society was formed and granted a charter by New York State to operate as a philanthropic organization in 1902. The early focus of the society was to aid Greek immigrants and the poor in general. The society rapidly expanded, and chapters were created in nearly every parish community throughout the United States. In 1931, the leadership of the Holy Trinity chapter consolidated the individual chapters under the National Ladies Philoptochos Society. This consolidation was instrumental in mobilizing the financial and leadership capacities to support major initiatives over the subsequent decades. While inclusive in scope, it was the Holy Trinity Philoptochos women who dominated the leadership and created a domestic agenda in this time period. The expansion of activities, along with changes in the organizational infrastructure, can be seen in the Philoptochos Constitution of 1929 and 1944. Both documents, which were written in Greek and English, laid out explicit rules for governance, securing and reporting finances, elections, and other activities. The 1944 document outlines the responsibilities of the Central Committee or National Board. 33 articles map out the governments of the society whose purpose in 1929 was, and I quote, "the relief of the suffering people of our race who are residing in the county of New York," end quote. Of interest, though, is the final stipulation, which states, and I quote, "in case of dissolution of the society, its property is transferred to the treasury of the Greek American Institute of New York to be used for its orphan pupils," end quote. And that's the very last article here. So here we see tangible evidence of women's direct involvement in and support of educational institutions. Moreover, what we see in this one stipulation, that there must have been such a degree of poverty among Greek immigrants that necessitated the need for a place to care for orphans. The Greek American Institute, or GAI, was New York's first parochial school established in the Bronx. It was founded as an orphanage and elementary school in 1912 through the combined efforts of the Atlantis newspaper, the Retail Florists Association, and the Confectioners Society. The school continues to operate as an elementary school to this day. And here is a photo of the facade of the school from their website. And here we have the 1944 Constitution. So this Constitution was amended during several Archdiocesan General Assemblies throughout the 1930s to include the Central or National Board's functions. According to the 1944 bylaws, the purpose of the newly incorporated Greek Ladies Philoptochos Society, Inc. expanded to 11 stipulations which directed their efforts to the care of poor women and girls, protecting infants, helping the sick, the homeless, and the unemployed, and caring for the free burial of the poor. There were patriotic commitments as well, which I've included here. One is to stand by the side of the American government for any national service. Another is to cultivate the acquaintance, the sisterly spirit among the members, the new generation, and the Americans of Greek descent as a whole, and the consciousness of duties to America. A little bit of awkward English phrasing there. But the major purpose of the Philoptochos Society is the establishment and maintenance of educational institutions and orphanages. This mission manifested itself in a number of ways, and I'd like to highlight now several areas of community activism that the Philoptochos was involved in during the 1930s and 1940s. The outbreak of World War II saw Greeks in the US mobilize themselves in support of the war effort. The country's heroic resistance to the Italian and subsequent German invasion and occupation devastated the country. Led by Archbishop Athinagoras, the head of the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese of North and South America, and Spiros Skouras, president of 20th Century Fox, the Greek War Relief Association was formed soon after Italian forces invaded Greece in 1940. Alexandros Kirou notes, and I quote, "Immediately, the nationwide networks of organization and communication developed earlier by the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese, major voluntary organizations such as AHEPA, GAPA, and other bodies mobilized themselves to support the GWRA," end quote. According to the 50th anniversary National Philoptochos album, Skouras arranged for a premiere benefit of the famous film Gone with the Wind, with the ladies engaged in the myriad details for this event. Philoptochos chapters organized fundraisers such as Tag Day and Knit a Sweater for a Soldier, which provided thousands of articles of clothing for children and adults in Greece. A women's auxiliary of the GWRA was established, but as Alexander Kitrev shows, and I quote, "It was the parish-based Philoptochos branches directed by the national president, Mrs. Zina Psaki of Brooklyn, that did all the work," end quote. Philoptochos raised enough funds to send 2 ambulances to Greece, one which was sent by the Astoria, New York chapter and bore the name Astoria, and the second which bore the name of the National Philoptochos Society. And now I'd like to share some examples that illustrate the critical role Philoptochos women played in the war effort And one particular individual that I'd like to draw your attention to is Katerina Nicolaou Vlavianou, or Katie Vlavianos, as she was called, who I introduced earlier. Katie Vlavianos was the wife of Basil J. Vlavianos, an attorney, publisher, and prominent editor of the National Herald. The couple married in 1932 and arrived in New York in 1939. Through his public appearances and editorials, Basil Vlavianos launched a vigorous campaign to pressure the British government to allow for the delivery of much-needed food and supplies to Greece. His wife, Katie, was active in numerous organizations. She served as vice president of the New York City Holy Trinity Philoptochos from 1946 to 1948, and then president from 1948 to 1956. She also held leadership positions in the National Philoptochos and maintained her membership with the organization for over 40 years. So they were really very much a dynamic duo couple. On this image on the left, we see a letter from the Women's Auxiliary of the GWRA addressed to Mrs. Vlavianos, thanking her for her splendid help during a fundraising drive. And on the right, the chairman of the Greek division of the Red Cross 1945 War Fund conveys his gratitude to the Holy Trinity Philoptochos for their help. In this slide, we see the Binghamton newspaper on the left, which reported on the completion of 67 garments for the GWRA by the Philoptochos Society. And on the right, the 3 Brooklyn Philoptochos chapters raised funds for the purchase of an X-ray machine to be sent to Greece. And here I have enlarged the list of officers of the Philoptochos Society of Holy Trinity on the left. And Mrs. Katie Vlavianos is featured as the president. And a lot of these women worked together for many, many years to build their schools and do all kinds of work. And the letter here is Katie Vlavianos is writing a check to pay for blankets that were to be sent to Greece. And here we have several certificates that were given to Katie Vlavianos for her service in the Red Cross. She also served as a dietitian's aide at St. Clair's Hospital. And she was a member of the U.S. Citizens Defense Corps, which trains civilians to respond to the threats during wartime. And now I'd like to turn to St. Basil's Academy and talk a little bit about this institution. In this image, in these 3 images on the left, we see a large photo which features students in front of the main building. In the upper right-hand corner, there are young women from the teacher training school who are putting on an ancient Greek play for a commencement ceremony. And in the lower right, the Philoptochos Holy Trinity gave Christmas gifts to the children of St. Basil's. Katie Vlavianos is hugging 2 of the children in the far right. And in the center is the famous Greek singer, Sophia Vembo, who inspired Greek troops on the front lines during the war. The establishment of St. Basil's in 1944 as a child welfare institution was in fact preceded by earlier attempts at establishing orphanages. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, religious denominations sponsored their own institutions to care for destitute children in the United States. There were several early efforts by Greek American communities to care for children who lost one or both parents or whose families experienced financial hardships such that they could not care for their children. For example, the Greek American Institute, which I talked about earlier, was initially founded as an institution like that. An orphanage and elementary school operated for 6 months in Pomfret, Connecticut in the 1930s before it was shut down due to lack of funds. The St. Stephanos Monastery in Gastonia, North Carolina, met the same fate. According to one brochure, the monastery was supposed to serve the Greeks of the South as a center for missionary and monastic activity, as an orphanage and school for children, and as a boarding school for the Greek American children of the South. The number of Greek schools and the lack of qualified teachers prompted the establishment of St. Basil's Academy as a teacher training school. And so it's really interesting to look at the growth of students and teachers in schools in the early 1930s. We see that the Greek language schools increased by over 60% from 284 in 1932 to 456 by the end of 1938. And we see the students doubling from about 12,700 students to under 25,000 students. So the Archdiocese really worked hard to offer services and to support, these educational institutions. So the Archdiocese, along with the Greek American community organizations, conceived of St. Basil's Academy as a home to serve children who needed refuge and who would also receive a Greek Orthodox elementary school education. The teachers trained in the teacher training school would ideally serve in their parish communities throughout the United States. The academy was founded in 1944 in Garrison, New York, on the banks of the Hudson River, and it was the Ladies Philoptochos Society who purchased the 400-acre estate that belonged to the family of Jacob Rupert. And much of the financial support for the academy came from a variety of sources: AHEPA, the Daughters of Penelope, the Pan-Arcadians, private donations, and all together they helped build the facilities that are still there: the dormitories, the gym, library, etc. But the Philoptochos Society undertook regular and systematic support for the school. Archival sources reveal a myriad of challenges that children and families experienced that led them to St. Basil's. One of the earliest letters was from Father Spiridon Economus of the Hellenic Orthodox Church of Eastern Utah. He wrote to the Philoptochos in June 1944, expressing his wish to send, and I quote, "some orphans and some extremely poor children whose father was killed while working in the coal mines," end quote. Several months later, Father Spiridon wrote to the Philoptochos again, requesting to send a widow with her 3 children to St. Basil's. Their father, too, was killed in a coal mine explosion. The children included a 3-month-old infant, a 9-year-old boy, and a 7-year-old girl, both of whom had learning disabilities, according to Father Spiridon. In other cases, both parents were living but unable to care for their children. The intake form completed by a couple from Brenton, Michigan in 1945 shows that they were willing to offer $40 per month to St. Basil's for the care of their son, Nikolaos. And I should also note that over the decades, the Academy provided a home and an education to roughly 100 boys and girls per year. And by the mid-70s, the elementary school had expanded to include a middle school and the first 2 years of high school. And here we have one of the commencement programs. It's in 1951, but it shows Katie Vlavianou as one of the advisors here. The Holy Trinity Chapter and the National Ladies Philoptochos Society witnessed dynamic changes and expansion in terms of their respective organizational structures and scope of activities. The efforts of the Ladies Philoptochos Society in supporting the Greek War Relief Association during World War II and the establishment of St. Basil's Academy reveal the extent to which Greek immigrant women living in New York City engaged in an unprecedented level of community activism. This study demonstrates that these women not only touched the lives of people like Jimmy Hadzaris, but they were part of a wider network of community organizations, all of which shared similar values embodied in faith, philanthropy, and education. The multifaceted efforts of the Philoptochos Society during these years uncover a little-known yet rich history of Greek American women's agency within the Greek Orthodox Church in the United States. Thank you.
Thank you. Any clarifying questions. Vasily Keith. Yeah.
Real quick. What is the status now of St. Basil's?
St. Basil's, that's a very good question. And that's a big question. I believe that there are students or young children who, my understanding is that there are still some students that are being cared for there, but they're very small in number, not like previous decades. The facilities are still very beautiful, and I know that they are used by the scouting organizations. My own parish community, which has a very active scouting community, uses those facilities for camping and for all sorts of activities. But it's very much I think, an underappreciated history which speaks to the purpose of our church, right? It's to care for our people, everyone, to care for the orphans, to care for all those who are marginalized, and and in doing so, also thinking about education, right? So to create a school to train teachers, to bring in Greek American women to become educated there in a 3-year program, and then to move out into their communities, I think was tremendous. I mean, this is a tremendous institution.
But it's kind of collapsed now.
Yes, it's not operating in the way that it was once upon a time. Yeah.
Thank you. Very good. Our final speaker for today, for this morning's session, is Dr. Aristotle Michopoulos, who will speak to us on the Archdiocese and the evolution of its educational system. Ari?
Thank you very much, Dr. Skedros. It looks like that we are already at the lunch period of the program. And
20 minutes, don't worry.
I don't know about that, Jim. People want to eat. My paper is The Evolution of the Greek Education in the United States. And I will try, it's impossible to read the paper here, being 12:30, so I will sum up what I'm writing here. The Greek education in the United States precedes the formation of the United States of America. So why I'm saying that? Because we have the oldest wooden school in America is in St. Augustine, Florida. And that precedes the creation, the establishment of the United States of America. There you have John Yiannopoulos and his daughter that are teaching Greek to the Greek immigrants of New Smyrna that was abolished in 1777, failed. And the people moved, most of them moved to St. Augustine. And there Yiannopoulos and his daughter were teaching the 500 Greeks that were part of the colony Greek. And that building is still extant. You can visit that in St. Augustine, and says the oldest wooden school in America. So the next presence of Greek education in America, you can find it with the orphans of the Greek Revolution. There were about 30 of them that were brought here by American Philhellenes that were fighting the Greek War of Independence. And most of them had illustrious careers. I will mention here only John Zachos, who was, his father was killed in the battles, and Samuel Gridley Howe brought him over here. He had a solid education, and then he became himself. First, he went to Antioch College in Ohio, and later on, he became a professor of literature and rhetoric, and ended up being a poet, theologian, and professor of theology at the Cooper Union Institute in New York for 27 years. So that's another one of quite interesting. Then another one was Evangelinos Apostolidis Sophocles, who was a student of Anthimos Gazis in Greece and came to the United States in 1828. He studied at Amherst College, and in 1842, he was appointed professor at Harvard University, where he taught Greek language and culture for 41 years, and he left everything he had, his books and the rest, to Harvard University. That became the core for the holdings of Harvard University in Greek studies. So another fascinating personality was Michael Anagnostopoulos, that became Anagnos, and he was brought to the United States in 1868 by Samuel Gridley Howe, who went to support the Cretan Revolution of 1866. He was there in Greece in 1821, and then he went again in 1866. And he, at the end of the revolution, brought back Michael Anagnostopoulos, who ended up being a very fascinating story, married his daughter, Julia Romana, who was a poetess, and when he died, he took over the Perkins Institute for the Blind that now has moved in Watertown. And he had a fundraising at that time of $100,000. And he raised that and proceeded with that. Then we move on, and we have the pedia that took place, the people that came to the United States, and Veronia actually covered some of it with the schools in New York. And much more, we have the mass migration, 350,000 immigrants from 1900 to 1920. These people, 350,000, served as the impetus for the creation of the Greek schools and centers of Hellenism in the United States, especially in the centers of Greeks in America, which were New York, Chicago, Boston, and Lowell. Salutos informs us that the first immigrants were considering the establishment of a school as, quote, as a matter of necessity as well as of cultural and national pride. In the same vein, Vlachos observes that, quote, the Greek school was considered as part of a complete personality formed by the Trinity, the Holy Trinity of language, national identity, and the Greek Orthodox religion. And as I mentioned before, the first formal school here was the Cadmus school in America, and that was here in Boston, which lasted for about 50 years and then closed down because of financial reasons. Then we have, about the same time, we have Socrates and Korais that were established in Chicago in 1908 and 1910. And then, similarly, as Veronia mentioned, the Syllogos Zacharoplaston in New York started the creation of the Greek school, and the Flowers Association of New York was conducting its own collection for the same purpose in New York, and thus we have the Greek Institute that was formed, that was purchased, the building was purchased for $31,000 in 1911. And it was the first Greek school in the state of New York. By the way, John Katsimatidis is one of the graduates of the school. During the 1940s, it had 8 grades, 4 teachers of the Greek, 3 for English, and 220 students. During the same decade of the above schools, we also had the school openings of the Greek Orthodox school in America, the Socrates School in Montreal, Canada, with 6 grades and 2 teachers of Greek and 2 of English, and 160 students, and then another 2 schools in Buenos Aires. Why I mention those? I mention those because until the end of Archbishop Iacovo's tenure, the Archdiocese was the Archdiocese of North and South America. So Canada was part of the Greek Archdiocese. At the end of course, as you all know, it was cut into 4, the one. Then in addition to that, we had a private school in New York, Ελληνοαμερικανικό Οικοτροφείο Παλικάρι Βέντοβα, with 5 teachers and 60 students that was outside the Archdiocesan system. The intense interest about the language drew the interest of many clergy and laity, and here is the dispute about the future of the Greek language, and one of interest is the opinion of the Bishop of Boston, His Grace or His Eminence, Bishop Alexopoulos, who said back in 1925, we shouldn't bother about the Greek language because by the end of the 1900s, wouldn't exist in America. So that was his view, and he was not alone, as many other pundits expressed the same view, and they believed that the best approach would be to concentrate their efforts in the preservation of our religion and culture. Thankfully, the all-merciful God was quite benevolent to the Greek language and the gospel, and by the end of the 20th century, we had more schools and more students than in 1926 when Alexopoulos said that. Moreover, in our days, the Greek language has been introduced to over 40 colleges and universities around the country, as well as charter schools that have been created during the last 25 years. Again, I will bring some numbers about the Greek schools. We start from, especially take a table from Malafouris. Babis Malafouris has a 10-year period, 1932, 1933. That starts with 284 schools, 12,000 students and 330 teachers, and then goes down, and the schools increase, the total students increase, and the number of teachers increase. By 1942, the 284 have become 500, actually 520 the year before. The students from 12,000 have become 21,834, and the teachers from 330 to 553. Now, if we go and juxtapose these numbers with what happened after that, we have 1970, we found that the school system of the Archdiocese was comprised of 18 day schools, the majority of them in New York, with about 5,000 students, starting with kindergarten and going to the 8th grade. The majority of the graduates of these schools were of better academic caliber than the students of the public schools. And then according to the Archdiocesan Yearbook of 2004, these numbers were as follows. Total Greek schools had increased to 23, and of this, there was one high school, the St. Demetrius school that we all know in Astoria. And total afternoon schools were 300, and total day of afternoon schools later on we have in 2003 and 4 35,000, and for 2007 we have again 27 schools, day schools, and the number is 4,432 students, and total afternoon schools 340. The numbers remain stable and lately decreased, and one of the most important things that appeared in the last, as I mentioned, in the last 30 years is that of the charter schools, which is a big issue that we can discuss later. It's a double-edged sword, has pluses and minuses, but until recently, that issue didn't exist. Now it exists, and we might have to deal with that, although you can't do very much about it. Then I bring up the issue of the language per se in the schools, and I found, for some of you might be cognizant of Professor Triandafyllidis, who is the father of modern Greek, the Demotic Greek in Greece, and who came here in 1939 and stayed for a few months, and he made a nice study about the school system in America. And he tells us the Greeks in America, when their children, he tells us, when their children started growing up and they realized that the return was not that easy, felt the need of the education, of the education and exerted a valiant and moving effort to realize this by creating afternoon and day schools. You can say that he continues that approximately 1/3 of the students are attending the schools and 2/3 do not attend, with exception of those that take private tuition, private lessons at home. He continues analyzing the situation, and he says that the best and almost ideal solution would be to have day schools, but he realizes that it's not easy, and the afternoon schools are a lisi anagis. It's a solution by necessity. It's not the real solution, but it's better than nothing. But the conditions for the operation of these schools are not good at all. Their distance, the afternoon schools, the distance from home is quite long, sometimes huge, since not all the communities have a school. The children arrive at these schools tired from the classes they attend in the regular American schools, and due to their limited number, the teachers usually must follow a method of parallel teaching or quiet work. The way the real teaching time is greatly reduced, and especially especially for students that have gaps from home, that they don't know Greek at all. And then he talks, and that is the surprise, rather, that the students were taught katharevousa, not Demotic Greek. Katharevousa in Greek schools in America, which is quite something. And he says that he proposes the change, of course, that did come, but at a visit that he had in one of the schools, the teacher was trying to teach an adjective of third declension, and then she came up to explain the dative case, which we took only in high school, and teaching the dative case in a primary school in America. I mean, shocked, Mr. Triandafyllidis. Witnessing such things, he was wondering what they could do to help these children from Greece to improve their situation. And not to waste valuable time in pursuit of medieval chimeras. It's true. Realizing the many difficulties of the teaching Greek in a different environment in such a short time, he concluded that the first thing needed was to change the readers. And in the end, I will present the many readers that were used over a long period of time. The reader issue presents for the schools of the diaspora, and especially the faraway ones, a special problem which appeared elsewhere as well, and the directors of our education correctly decided to write readers especially for the Greek children living there and adapt it to their own needs and interests. So we see after some time that our readers produced in America that have local, express their local culture and customs that exist here that are not existing in Greece, and so on and so forth. Then, being aware of this new situation, some of the publishing firms in New York, like Divris and the Kedrikon, start publishing their own books. And even worse, sometimes some of them, they put their own cover on books from Greece and they present it as their own, which is, it's not that nice. The situation was getting worse with the time, but the desire and insistence of Archbishop Athinagoras, we have now the language that is in Katharevs and all this, and Archbishop Athinagoras insists of having the Greek language even in Sunday schools, the Sunday schools to be taught in Greek. And his rationale was that, quote, the Greek is the language of the gospel, and thus a unique privilege of Hellenism. And we should absolutely consider it necessary for the preservation of our religious and national identity. As part of this effort, should be also considered the creation of the Council of Higher Education, another εκπαιδευτικό συμβούλιο, one of the goals of which was the supervising of all schools coming under the umbrella of the Office of Education of the Archdiocese. Thus, despite the fact that teachers and Sunday school teachers were facing serious problems, the Sunday school language continued to be in Greek. With the arrival of the new Archbishop, Archbishop Michael, the whole issue came to the surface again. The Archbishop, not to lose the students, especially the GOA, of which he was the spiritual father, thanks Dimitri, he allowed its meetings to be conducted in English, and the same thing he changed. He said, you can teach in English in the Sunday school. So that was Michael. And we have a new picture there. Let's move on. In the area of education, the new Archbishop, now we come to Archbishop, that's the new Archbishop Iakovos. Let's see here. Jump because we have 3 minutes to go. He inherited a complex problem and he tried to find a solution. He realized that even teachers were not qualified as he would like them to be, and were using old teaching methods, and their salaries, on the other hand, were quite low. All this forced the Archbishop to bring the matter to the Clergy Laity Congress of New York in 1970, where he stated that the existing system is sick and that the teaching methods and techniques should be changed and be based on the latest findings of pedagogy. The language must be presented in a systematic way, and the current linguistic research and audiovisual technology should be used to the maximum, he stated. The Congress and the Archbishop asked that the Department of Education move to these new directions in order to meet the demands, and that fell on the shoulders of Manuel Hadjimanuel, and they started producing a whole series of books. And we don't have much time. The series was by Athena Hadjemanuel, Matheno Ελληνικά, and then we have many other books that are produced by either the Department of Education funded by the Greek government, the Greek consulate in New York, or by independent scholars that they produce, and we'll see here, they produce their own books and sell them. Then we have a lot of stuff that we don't have time to go through. We come to Archbishop Spiridon, who tackled the same problem, and he created a committee for the Greek language under Professor Asias, to went around America to collect data and present his own method, the Asias method. But as you know, we all know that his tenure was very short and nothing substantial took place. And finally, we come to Archbishop Demetrius, who inherited whatever was from before, and he appointed a new director of education, Dr. Efthymiopoulos, who had retired from as education counsel in Chicago, and he created a new series of books that were Tai Ελληνικά, which were financed by the Faith Foundation in New York. And then I'm talking about the parallel support of books in Greek that especially that were produced by the Πρόγραμμα Παιδεία Ομογενών of the University of Crete, which was funded by the European Union, and the funds were going to Greek universities and then to the diaspora. America was one of them. I was representing the United States. We produced about 70 books, tapes and everything else, language, culture, γράμματα και πράγματα, and all good things, and that's about it. I don't have time to go details. Let's see the books there. And if you have questions, and Dr. Skedros allows, I don't think that...
I know the cafeteria is waiting for us.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the problem.
Okay, you see here, this is by Olga Eleftheriadis, a contemporary Greek. This is independent scholar, her own. Let's move on.
Just run through them. Yeah.
Yeah, we have a lot of them. Contemporary grammar.
Keep going.
Keep going fast because there are plenty. Stogipo, astronautis, astronaut, chocolates. Αργυρούδη, τα Ελληνόπουλα, that's another one, old one, αναγνωστικό της Δευτέρας, second grade, and that's another, the Greek American, that's the Greek American. Yeah, read it. Αμερικανόπουλο, ελληνικά γράμματα, Greek letters, Dibris. Yeah, μαθαίνουμε ελληνικά, we learn Greek. And here you see Papaloizos, a special mention Papaloizos. Papaloizos has been there for ages and ages. Yeah, once most for the taxes, publications, μαθαίνω χρωματίζοντας, I learned by painting. Λίγο απ' όλα, a little bit of everything. Μαθαίνουμε ελληνικά, yeah. We are learning Greek, a sixth grade reader, αγνωστικό. Papaloizos, by the way, Ελλάδα, Αμερική, Greece and America. And there was one of Katharevsa, if you notice. Yeah, this is book of, yeah. Modern Greek practice, yeah, by practice, Demotic Greek by Rasias. That's Demotic Greek too. And the latest version is Greek today. Τα ελληνικά για ξενόγλωσσους in Athens was independent scholars. Okay. So, modern Greek idioms. You have idioms and irregular verbs. We have a good number of books here in our library. Yeah. There you are. You have verbs there, regular and irregular, 600 verbs, canon carpa, and I think that's where the end. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Let's go to lunch now.
Yeah, I think we need to run to the cafeteria. So I have a ticket for everybody for lunch, so please.